in a chilling tale of endurance and tragedy. The Lady Franklin Bay Expedition set out in 1881 to explore the Arctic, only to vanish into a frozen nightmare. When rescue finally arrived, just 6 men remained, and the truth of what happened shocked the world.
In the late 19th century, exploration was not just a matter of discovery. It was a test for national pride, personal endurance, and scientific ambition. The frozen wilderness of the Arctic called out to nations eager to plant their flags in uncharted territory. But for the United States, that call would lead to one of the most harrowing experiences in polar history. In 1881, a team of 25 men, scientists, soldiers, and adventurers, set sail for the top of the world under the leadership of Lieutenant Adolphus Greely. Their goal was to establish a meteorological observation post at Lady Franklin Bay, part of an international effort to collect data in the Arctic, the first major scientific collaboration of its kind. What awaited them was not just isolation and extreme temperatures. It was betrayal, starvation, and death. Lady Franklin Bay is named after Lady Jane Franklin, wife of Sir John Franklin. In 1845, Sir John Franklin, a seasoned British naval officer and explorer, led an expedition to navigate and chart the final unexplored section of the Northwest Passage, a sea route through the Arctic connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, with a crew of 129 men. The expedition was one of the best equipped of its time, carrying 3 years' worth of provisions, including canned food. They had coal-powered engines and the latest in navigation tools. The ships were last seen by Europeans in Baffin Bay. After that, they vanished. For years, no one knew what had happened. More than 30 search expeditions were launched. Clues emerged from the Inuit, abandoned campsites, personal items, and eventually a note left on King William Island, revealing that Franklin had died and the surviving crew had decided to march south. The ships had become trapped in the ice off King William Island. After 2 winters frozen in place, Franklin died, and the crew, weak and starving, attempted to escape on foot. Many perished from scurvy, starvation, and exposure. Some even resorted to cannibalism, according to both Inuit accounts and modern forensic evidence from the bones found from the lost men. In the 21st century, Canadian search teams finally located the wrecks. HMS Erebus was found in 2014, HMS Terror in 2016. Lady Jane Franklin became well known in the press. For years, she pressured the Navy to send search parties and funded her own expeditions to find her husband and the lost crew. In the summer of 1881, the crew headed up the coast on board the Proteus, reaching St. John's, Newfoundland in July. They then headed to Good Howe, Greenland. They picked up their final crew members, 2 Inuit dog sled drivers, a physician, and a scientist. The Proteus arrived safely at Lady Franklin Bay. They dropped the 25 crew members off with their supplies and departed. The expedition established Fort Conger on the banks of Lady Franklin Bay. Fort Conger, located far north on Ellesmere Island in a polar desert. The average winter temperatures is around -22 degrees Fahrenheit and can drop as low as -69 degrees Fahrenheit. Summer temperatures range from 37 to 54 degrees. freezing temperatures can occur in any month. Winters are long and harsh, while summers are cool and short. Due to the harsh climate, vegetation is sparse. Annual precipitation is very low, some areas receiving only 2.5 inches a year. The summer of 1881 had been extremely warm for the region. There was very little ice around the bay when Proteus arrived. This gave the men a false sense of hope. They underestimated how difficult it would be to receive supplies in the future from the relief ships. The bay is usually surrounded by ice year-round. The first year went according to plan. Fort Conger was built, but it was barely a defense against the brutal Arctic winter. They endured -50-degree temperatures, darkness, and near constant isolation. Yet the team worked hard. They recorded weather patterns and scientific data. Lieutenant James Lockwood and Sergeant David Brainerd led a sledging party, reaching a new most northerly point. They reached 83 degrees 24 north, 40 degrees 46 west, off of the northern coast of Greenland. By the summer of 1882, the crew was eagerly expecting a relief ship to deliver supplies. On July 8, 1882, the resupply ship Neptune left St. John's and headed towards Greely and his men. But thick pack ice and bad weather kept the ship from reaching Fort Conger. Captain Beebe was forced to turn around prematurely. All he could do was leave supplies at Cape Sabine, over 100 miles away. The remaining provisions were left in Newfoundland. They would return and deliver them the following year. By August, the men at Fort Conger realized that the relief ship was not coming. They had to cut rations and live off supplies for another year. The group's physician, Octave Pavy, had only signed a contract for 1 year. He told Lieutenant Greely that he would not be renewing his contract, but he would still treat the men if they needed any medical attention. Greely was outraged and demanded all of the doctor's journals and medical records. Pavy refused, so Greely arrested him, but he did not lock him up. He would court-martial him once they returned to America. The men at Fort Conger settled in for another long and brutal winter in the Arctic Circle. They continued collecting scientific data, but many were worried as the expedition faced severe hardship. In 1883, the Yantic, commanded by Commander Frank Wilds, failed to reach Fort Conger. In June of 1883, the Proteus left St. John's under the command of Lieutenant Ernest Garlington. Proteus was also blocked by ice and could not continue. On July 22nd, the ship was caught and crushed by the ice, sinking with most of the provisions still on board. Lieutenant Garlington and his crew abandoned ship, surviving in small boats for over a month until they were finally rescued. The summer ended with no relief reaching Fort Conger. Greely knew that if the relief ships could not reach Lady Franklin Bay, they would drop their supplies at Cape Sabine. It had been 2 long years since they received supplies. They had to make a difficult choice. Wait another long, cold year hunting for food at Fort Conger, hoping that a relief ship could reach them in 1884, or make the dangerous attempt to reach Cape Sabine over 100 miles away, not knowing if supplies were actually waiting for them there. Greely weighed his options and decided to travel south. Greely did not know it at the time, but only a small cache of supplies had been left at Cape Sabine in 1882. The rest of the supplies were in Newfoundland, St. John's, to be delivered the following year. The expedition set out in small boats, heading south to Cape Sabine. They were quickly trapped in the ice and were now drifting in an ice floe, unable to steer or change course. After 51 miserable days, they finally reached shore and made their way to Cape Sabine. They were expecting to find 2 years' worth of supplies waiting for them, but what they found crushed their spirits. They found only a few weeks' worth of food. Their supplies were already drastically low. Greely immediately cut their daily rations down, even more, in an attempt to conserve food. They dug into the snow, creating a miserable camp with almost no shelter, trapped by ice and isolation. For months they endured starvation, hypothermia, and madness. The men ate boiled sealskin and lichens. By New Year 1884, the men were suffering from scurvy and were desperately hungry. On January 18, 1884, the first man from the expedition died from starvation. The men ate anything that they could find: candles, leather, bird droppings. They caught what they could with nets or by hunting, but it was not enough. Men began dying at an alarming rate. Some of the men even started stealing food from the rations. One man, Private Charles Henry, was caught stealing rations multiple times. Lieutenant Greely warned the men.
"The next man caught stealing food will be shot."
Private Henry ignored the warning. He was caught and executed on Greely's orders. Lieutenant Greely's wife, Henrietta Greely, kept asking the government for a rescue attempt. She wrote representatives and went to the press. The government authorized another attempt in April of 1884. 4 vessels, the USS Bear, USS Thetis, HMS Alert, and Loch Garry, made their way into the Arctic in search of survivors. On June 22, 1884, a rescue fleet finally broke through the ice. What they found at Cape Sabine would shock the world. Out of the original 25 men, only 7 survived. The others succumbed to exposure, starvation, hypothermia, drowning, or far worse. Rumors of cannibalism haunted the survivors. Greely was hounded by the press, but refused to discuss it. The truth, frozen in the Arctic, may never fully be known. Survivor Joseph Ellison died on July 8th after multiple amputations. There were now only 6 survivors from Fort Conger. On July 17, 1884, the relief ship reached St. John's, Newfoundland. News of the survivors was sent by telegraph. Word spread like wildfire. They rested for 10 days, then finally returned to America. The surviving members of the expedition were treated as heroes. A parade was held for them in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The bodies of the dead were recovered on August 14, 1884. The body of Lieutenant Frederick Kissenbury, second in command of the expedition, was exhumed and an autopsy was performed. They found evidence that flesh had been cut from his body, fueling rumors of cannibalism. The Lady Franklin Bay expedition began with ambition, science, and a quest for glory, but it ended in starvation, death, and controversy. What was meant to be a symbol of American progress became a haunting reminder of how quickly Mother Nature can turn against you. 19 men lost their lives in this tragic tale. Those who survived carried the pain for the rest of their lives. This story endures, etched into the cold and into history. Sometimes the harshest discoveries aren't made with science or instruments, but in what it takes to survive. I want to thank y'all for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you on the next. Peace.